So here we are, another conversation that matters. I'm here with Chris Touissant and Matt Baird. Today's topic is zero point energy. And for all the newbies out there, in your own words, can you just tell us what 0 point is and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll kind of get right into it.
Sure. I made a film a few years ago called Free Energy, The Race to 0 Point. Now, the concept of 0 point energy was developed quite a few years ago. It was also considered the ether of the ancients, and up until the time of quantum mechanics was considered that there was this substance finer than air, finer than liquid, gas, anything like that, that permeated all of space and time. It's basically where space and time is embedded, if you will. And modern science has found out that this 0 point field does exist. Hal Puthoff and numerous other top-notch scientists have put together theories over the years of just what it should be able to do. It's the point at which absolute zero temperature is reached in a vacuum, and then there is still this residual energy that has been measured that exists, even though traditional physics doesn't expect it to be anything. You know, if you reach 0 point, there shouldn't be any energy detectable at all whatsoever, but there is. And now that's a whole different thing until some inventors started to use 0 point as a way of explaining how we might potentially be able to tap this energy. Brian O'Leary once said that it's like comparable to a fish in water. It's so pervasive the fish doesn't even know that he's surrounded by water. It's just that's part of his environment. He swims and lives this his entire life. So we all exist every moment in this 0 point field.
So not necessarily like, because a lot of people may have come to mind cold fusion, and you just said 0 point being absolute zero. It's not necessarily that. Is it that absolute zero with the temperature, or? Maybe if you could clarify. Well,
the 0 point is the place where 0 degrees Celsius,
right,
there should be no movement, there should be no excess heat energy or anything within a vacuum, like the vacuum of space in which the Earth exists. Did you want to add anything there to
No,
that?
I mean, I think NASA has now demonstrated this does exist, but of course they're not calling it the ether. It could be referred to as radiant energy, 0 point energy, vacuum energy, or maybe even, dark energy. They know that something's out there, but they're just not sure exactly what it is.
I see.
So, but there are inventors these days that are now in the 21st century tapping into this, and we're finding a lot of amazing discoveries.
Okay.
There are also a lot of theoretical physicists and very far out people like Tom Baird, and that has made the word scalar energy very widespread, that are using very advanced mathematics, some of Maxwell's equations for instance, beyond just what is normally taught in schools, to actually show that this does exist and that we exist in what is called an open system. So we're not pulling energy out of nothing. It's not a perpetual motion type of scenario where you just suddenly get, energy from nowhere. Think of it as a water wheel tapping the energy of the water flowing over it. Now, until somebody...
Or a windmill, yeah.
Yeah.
I see. So the theory is, the idea is that we're in a windmill, we just don't realize it?
We're in wind.
We're in wind.
The etheric wind.
Right, the etheric wind. Okay, I see. So, it's happening. We just haven't been able
to monitor it or tap into it. Like Nikola Tesla, after his Wardenclyffe Tower venture was pulled out from under him, with J.P. Morgan, he had to find a way to tap into radiant energy coming from the sun. So he invented a box, it was about this big, took out the internal combustion engine of a Pierce Arrow car, put an AC motor in the car, went to Buffalo, New York, and in 1931, he was driving around New York City at 90 miles an hour in this car. It was called the Tesla car, and off radiant energy from the sun, not solar power, but radiant energy. And he believed that we were constantly being bombarded by this energy from the sun. Unfortunately for him, the people in Buffalo at the time thought that he was a black magician. They couldn't understand how this could work. Even today, we're like, how does this work? So they called him a black magician. He got so insulted, he ripped out his machine, went back to New York City, and no one ever saw the machine again.
Wow. So you mentioned Nikola Tesla, I think.
Right.
His name seems to be coming up more and more in multimedia and especially, I guess, in the this energy world. He was also a character in, you say, magician in the movie Prestige.
Right, exactly.
I think David Bowie plays him.
Yeah, good. He did a good job.
Awesome. There's a mysteriousness about him.
Yeah.
But you know, I keep hearing his name come up. Could you maybe just for those who aren't familiar with Tesla and his works, and why isn't aren't his inventions being mass-produced, or why, you know, what happened? So you mentioned J.P. Morgan, but just go into that history just a little bit.
Well, his first major invention was alternating current, which is funding what everybody uses now. I mean, Edison originally came up with direct current, DC. So, but the problem with DC is you needed every 2 square miles, you needed a factory,
transformer.
Yeah. Billowing smoke every 2 square miles. So Tesla came along and invented AC, alternating current, which could be transmitted many miles over power lines. So that trumped Edison. Right. So they clashed like this. There were wars, AC, DC wars for quite some time. And Westinghouse funded Nikola Tesla. So the fact that none of his inventions are being used is wrong. I mean, everyone's using AC right now. He was also the true inventor of radio. That they found out that Marconi, in 1943, the United States Supreme Court reversed all the patents from Marconi to Tesla, because it turned out that Marconi, he was Tesla's assistant, stole 12 of his patents and used his family's leverage to get radio patented. But at the time, you know, Tesla didn't want to pursue any legal action, which some say that he should have, but he was already in the history books. So even kids today think that Marconi was a true inventor of radio when it was Nikola Tesla.
Now, one other thing about Tesla was that as he was becoming famous and hobnobbing with all the socialites in New York City back around the turn of the century, he started actually coming up with some very interesting theories about how there could be beings on other planets like Mars. And of course, at that time, there was no patience for something like that. And he also had very interesting...
Well, even today, you say, you know, Mars, what do you think?
He had these interesting habits where he wouldn't shake hands with people. He would use numerous napkins because he knew about germs and things like that. That, you know, unfortunately, we now know could contribute to the transmission of disease. And so people thought he was eccentric and very weird. Yet he has over 400 patents, I believe it is, with the Patent Office that have all held up and have resulted in different types of energy-related devices, some for electrotherapy and things like that, many of which haven't been, like you said, exploited and put into the commercial marketplace. Because
radiant energy car. I
mean, that would be awesome. That would be just
we could
incredible.
do away with all the oil to, you know, overnight.
You could drive around the world for free.
Yeah, there are military applications too. He had invented an earthquake machine, which started causing several buildings in his neighborhood to
in New York City
to start quaking.
He caused a major earthquake in New York City.
Like a fracting machine or something?
No, it's I think it's resonant energy.
Yeah.
Where everything, like say this wall has a certain resonant frequency,
Right.
and if you know what that frequency is and you can tap into it, you can bring a building down. So he started his machine in New York City, and he was causing an earthquake, and this made the papers at the time, an earthquake. And when the police finally figured out it's got to be that crazy guy Tesla, they came in on him as he was taking an axe to his own machine, because the building that it was in was starting to come down.
Oh, wow.
So, in fact, I think it was Mythbusters tried to duplicate the machine, but they didn't have too much success with it. But yeah.
Let's hope not. I mean,
No, yeah, that's
I mean,
another military application.
When he
Jeez.
died, too, it's reported that all of his inventions, his safe was found open, and a lot of the diagrams and personal belongings were taken by the military intelligence at that time, because they didn't want it to fall into the hand of the Russians.
So he's kind of the grandfather of Zero Point, so to say? I mean, I'm sure, were there others before him on record, or we just don't know that?
There were not really others before him. I mean, there were some people
Right.
doing some very exotic things with magnetism, for instance.
Okay.
And you could even say Benjamin Franklin, who was pretty
Right.
much the person who brought electricity
Sure.
into common knowledge. He was doing some very interesting experiments that kind of dabbled in the same direction. But Tesla's pretty much recognized. Now, there's a fellow named T. Henry Morey, who also was had studied Tesla, and he was also developing a device which would basically take energy out of the ambient atmosphere. He called it space energy.
Yeah, and he developed what they called a radiant energy receiver, which was like what Tesla was dealing with. He was able to light a bank of lights, and I think produce like 50,000 watts of electricity, once again from radiant energy. And the United States at that time, this is before everybody had transmission wires, and they wanted to contact him about using his receiver instead of putting wires everywhere. But you know, he was, I think, shot at twice. His family was shot at. And in the end, he had put all of his energy or his time and money into his device. His lab assistant, it turned out, was a communist sympathizer. So he's demonstrating this at a fair, and out of the crowd, his assistant comes up with a baseball bat and smashes the device to pieces.
Wow.
And that was it. Everything, he never had enough money to rebuild that thing ever again.
Wow.
So there are always interesting stories behind all of these inventors, and it seems so many times that we're just so close to the answer, and then it just slips away.
Well, since Tesla, and it seems like he's been raided by the military and these other inventors getting sabotaged, you know, the biggest question is why. I kind of know the answer, but in your own words, for the audience, you know, why would somebody want to sabotage an energy device that could basically free the entire world and get everybody off the grid and empower? I probably just answered the question there, but empower all of the people in poverty who can't afford to pay for their their electric bills. What's the reasoning behind it? In your own words, I could go into this, but.
Well, I think there's a tremendous inertia in moving past the status quo that we have as a society, the Western civilization has. It's less so in the Eastern civilizations, by the way. But there has been this structure that's been built throughout the industrial age, which always sucks energy and it sucks control up to the very wealthy at the top of the pyramid. And they don't want to let that go. They don't want to give up that control. That's why we have these, multi-billions of dollars put into hydroelectric dams or huge nuclear power plants and you know the grid, which it's all about domination from a central megalithic corporate government
centerpiece
interface, yeah.
Right, as opposed to empowering the individual.
Yeah.
And it would be I mean, say if we have it across one of these devices that actually worked, it would distribute the power to individuals. I mean, we're talking about empowering the populace, and so that the status quo no longer has, you know, a stranglehold on cutting off your electricity in the wintertime or in the summertime. If you can power your own home, then you're kind of like turning the power structure upside down, where the people, you know, I guess if you want to call it the 99% or whatever, the people are taking back their power, and they're realizing, hey, we are the ones that have the true power if we exercise it. And I always like to say that, you know, a well-educated populace is mediocrity's worst nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I always like to say.
Now, from a military standpoint, too, you've got to realize that even though we may think that some of these more exotic advanced technologies are benign, like energy, like fire, they can be used for good or bad. They could be useful for evil purposes.
Well, the earthquake machine, I mean, that's terrifying if somebody, you know, if it gets in the wrong hands.
Yeah, the HARP array up in Alaska, too, is based on original patents by Tesla.
Oh, interesting.
Right, off the Wardenclyffe Tower.
And what was Tesla using those patents for? What was his, because there's a lot of conspiracy, what is HARP, what's it doing? And you hear certain stories. Just what was he going to use it for? That would.
Well, Tesla was a very peaceful-oriented person, and he had this kind of idealist illusion, perhaps, that if he built an ultimate shield, you know, then he could actually prevent wars from occurring. Yeah,
it would be like on the Enterprise, you know, when you have shields around the Enterprise. Yeah. So originally the Wardenclyffe Tower, he wanted for radio. He was, but then Marconi beat him. Then he went to J.P. Morgan and said, well, that's okay. What I really want to do with it is tap into the ionosphere, electrify the Earth so anybody around the world could put a simple box with a wire in it into the ground and have free electricity. And J.P. Morgan said something like, if the energy is everywhere, you can't meter it.
Right.
So that's where things went, you know, awry. And what Tesla later did is, right before World War II broke out, he went to the British government with a smaller scaled down version that he had turned into a particle beam weapon, and he attempted to sell this to the British government, saying, hey, look, you don't have to worry about, you know, people flying over, because you're just going to destroy them out of the thin air. He wanted $30 million to build it. They passed. They thought it was too expensive. But if they had, you know, the Battle of Britain would last one afternoon, and the Luftwaffe would have been destroyed. So he was very, very ahead of his time. He also came up with the first remote-controlled anything, which was a submarine boat. Yeah, a submarine boat about this big, you know, and he showed it to the Navy. And this is before 1900. You know, he was doing remote control. He's the father of any remote control car, or even the, you know, the drones that we have today. Sure. That's all original Tesla technology.
So he used radio waves that he probably invented.
Wireless,
And once again, the Navy at the time thought it was witchcraft. And they said, it's too advanced, we can't deal with it. So he was definitely on the cutting edge.
So where does that bring us today with these, you know, you guys have seen, I'm sure you've seen inventions, and you did a documentary on these things. What's out there today? What do we have to look forward to? Is the madness going to be, is it ever going to stop?
Well, I think because of the environmental destruction that is occurring, we can't keep going down the route of fossil fuels and nuclear, you know, especially with the Fukushima plant, and, you know, which is becoming worse than Chernobyl. You know, the genie's out of the box. There are a number of people that we've met, and many, many more probably, who are tinkering around in their garages that we haven't yet met, that are getting anomalous results that can't be explained. The instrumentation for being able to measure that some of these devices put out many, many times the amount of electrical input it takes to run them and get them started.
Which is called over-unity.
Over-unity
Okay.
is the term for that. Which,
So-
you know, once again, it brings up people's fears of, oh, this is voodoo science. And
Sure.
it's-
Well, if they thought Tesla's stuff, if they thought, you can imagine us now looking at some of this stuff, like the Navy looking at Tesla's radio waves, or his car that ran off of.
Yeah, it's phenomenal
you know,
back then. Even today,
Back then,
you could use
mind-blowing.
that.
You can use that as maybe a comparison. You know, we're just looking at stuff that we don't understand. I mean, I often use the analogy, if we went back in time and pulled out a cell phone and used it just, 100 years ago, we'd probably be burned at the stake for, witchcraft.
Right.
But I think the awareness with Fukushima and the oil spill off the Gulf, these things keep happening.
Right.
And I'm hoping that people are waking up and seeing that we have to find an alternative. And maybe it's the time, maybe because of this, people are starting to open their eyes a little bit, even though it sounds like these technologies and devices have been out there for, over 100 years now.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that now's the time to get the word out, and people will at least be open to looking into alternatives, and not solar and not wind. I mean, these are great, they're clean, but I think the reason they exist is because these companies that basically run the show know that they're not going to go anywhere.
Right.
The new energy movement has been calling for an Apollo-like program to ramp up the research and development in a number of different areas, because it's not just one or two devices. There are just different ways of tapping into this zero-point energy, of tapping into this field and being able to extract usable energy. And
really quick, just to give the audience a taste of what are some of the types of devices that you've seen or that you might be able to talk about. I mean, we don't have to go into specifics.
Chris did a great documentary, Free Energy, Race to Zero Point, of which, I was shooting in something else, and I happened to be over at his house, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my favorite documentary. He's like, well, hey, I did that. And I'm like, hey, we should talk, we should hang out. And I think probably what's most exciting is, did you ever hear of Pons Fleischmann? Yeah, Pons Fleischmann back in 1989, cold fusion. Basically having a nuclear reactor on a tabletop. And they got jumped all over, demonized, they were run through the mud. 60 Minutes recently, I think it was, 2 years ago?
About 2 years ago.
Yeah, vindicated them, saying, hey, they were absolutely right. Now, instead of calling it cold fusion, because that's been, that term has been tainted.
Debunked so
it's like
much,
low energy nuclear reaction.
Right.
So there are people out there that are currently working on low energy nuclear reaction, and even NASA, I believe it was last week, is now promoting low energy nuclear reaction as a way to maybe getting us to Mars, and also to power your homes. Right. So you could have your own little nuclear device that's completely clean, it doesn't pollute at all, and it can power your home, and that's just amazing. Yeah. For NASA to come forward and say, hey, look, we think that this might be what the answer is. In fact, you did Cold Fusion, Fire from Water. Yeah. That whole documentary about that. Yeah,
part of that. We had Arthur C. Clarke in that as well, who's very convinced. He passed away, of course, but he was very convinced that there was something real to the whole phenomenon of cold fusion. And we've since seen some similar devices come out. Something called the ECAT, for instance, by Andrea Rossi in Italy has come out, and is getting pretty widespread attention within the community of the free energy research and journalistic tech magazines that cover that type of thing. And there's some interesting things that I've run into. I think a lot of these inventors are very honest people. I don't think they're trying to run scams on people. But they run out of money, or they have a little bit of a egotistical thing going where they feel that their invention is the only one out there that's really going to ultimately save the world, and
Right.
so they take on this messiah-like complex sometimes,
Right.
and they end up actually being their own worst enemy,
Yeah.
shooting themselves in the foot when they have potential funders.
Yeah.
Well, just right quick for the listeners. I mean, when I first heard about this, I think I was back in high school when I heard the idea of 0 point, and I'm like, well, why isn't everybody doing this? And I actually had a friend that worked in the, it was mentioned to you guys earlier, actually worked at the in Tokyo Electric, TEPCO, and I showed him some videos and told him about it, and he said, that's all, that's horse crap or whatever, and blew it all off. But it blew my mind at the time. I'm like, if this stuff exists, why don't these electric companies, why don't the energy companies take it and do something with it? But we kind of answered the question earlier, but I just want to reiterate to the audience, because they're probably asking the same exact question. Why don't they grab it? Why don't they pursue it? So if you guys can just explain that to the audience
Actually,
in more detail, because we kind of talked about it, but
yeah, in some cases they are, secretly.
Okay.
Yeah, there's this one company in New Jersey called Blacklight Power, and they've already had utility companies sink millions of dollars into that, into their technology. And they keep saying year after year they're ready to make a major announcement. We're still waiting. Hopefully you guys will get it together, and be able to put it out there. But I think it's just, you got to realize that the energy industry is multi-billions of dollars.
It's probably the biggest industry in the world.
Yeah, and they're funded by banks. Banks have to get involved.
Right.
So anybody who comes out, for instance, there was this guy named Park who at the University of Maryland was a physicist, and he would be with the American Physicists Association, constantly claiming that it was all nonsense, just throwing the baby out with the bathwater in every case. And you have people like that, or different people within the mainstream academia that come out and trash it, and no investor wants to take a chance.
Sure.
They don't want to be the first.
Right.
No.
And there have been other inventors that have unfortunately sold out to big oil companies. They kind of make them an offer they can't refuse.
Right.
Where it's like, hey, here's millions of dollars, or nothing.
Right.
And sometimes the which is strangely enough, which I found the concept hard, is that the government also has a national security clause, which they can slap on any invention.
Right.
So if some, let's say the most perfect inventor comes up with something tomorrow that would liberate us overnight, you can slap a national security clause on it, and then you can never do it again. Oh,
that's
happened.
what happened to Adam Trumley, right?
Yeah.
And he was slapped with a 25-year gag order or something.
Yeah, and you can't.
Right.
We had one gentleman I was talking to. He found out that he had heard through the grapevine that they were coming for him to his house, and within 2 days. So he quickly whipped up a book, sent it out to 12 friends overseas. When the people knocked on the door, he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm published in Europe." They were furious. They couldn't do anything.
Oh, okay.
Turned around and walked away.
So we're finding ways to get around the
inventors are getting smart.
And
some of them are even doing open sourcing now on their devices. It's like Bedini is putting out his technical specs out on the internet.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's so the motivation. Obviously, it's going to, potentially these kinds of devices, this kind of energy could completely shut down the way we run the world.
Right, absolutely.
So that's the threat. That's the reason why, and that's taking a lot of money out of some people's pockets. So
exactly. If you're a banker and you just spent $70 billion financing major oil tankers,
right, or a nuclear plant,
tankers.
and these kinds of things.
Right.
This dirty energy, so to say. But like J.P. Morgan said, it's
energy's everywhere. You can't meter it.
You can't meter it. So.
And I don't know if you're probably too young, but I was in the LA Public Library looking up, old energy type of books, and Disney this is like maybe 1950, 51, came out with a book for kids about the miracles of nuclear power. And it was a whole picture book about how nuclear power was going to liberate everybody.
Wow.
And it was going to be so cheap, you couldn't even meter it. Because you couldn't even, it was going to be so cheap that you wouldn't even be charged for it. It was this magical thing.
Wow.
Well, you know, and so Disney got on board with how to do all this wonderful things, but I guess what all charts didn't indicate is that, you know, corporate greed is always on the rise.
Right.
So, you know, it's, but back then it was like, oh, nuclear power is it. You know, we're all going to pay nothing and it's going to liberate us. No, no, if somebody else is holding the keys, you know, to your salvation or to your energy needs, well, they've got you.
Absolutely.
And so I think we're trying to, you know, make a difference where give people back the power.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, give them the power so we can save our planet, you know, so we can, you know, not have all the glaciers melt.
Sure.
And eventually, you know, maybe start colonizing other planets, you know.
And if the energy companies are smart, they'll see that, you know, there's, I think, going to be great rewards and advances in technology and monetarily. There'll be rewards there. I mean, I don't think it has, you know, it sounds, in theory, it seems like we're taking all the money away from them, but I think, you know, it's just,
there's plenty of uses for oil, for instance, in plastics.
Exactly. It's just they're probably used to the one way of doing it, and this is how it's always been done, and that's the only way we're going to be able to do it.
Well, they could easily diversify and do wind, wave, you know, and solar. I mean, I think I was reading that Ireland wants to, in the near future, cut themselves off from all types of foreign energy because the tides around Ireland with the North Sea are amazing. I mean, imagine having like a windmill underwater that turns constantly. I mean, you can't always predict the wind, but you can predict the tides 300 years into the future. I mean, that's an amazing amount of electricity. If the oil companies or energy companies were smart, they would get on board with that now. You know.
Well, I think we should probably wrap it up, but excellent talk, guys. Hopefully giving some hope to all the craziness that's going on in the world right now. And with these.
And I would say if there's inventors out there, or prospective inventors, or kids that want to try to, you know, go for it, you know, see that vision and try to develop something new that we haven't seen before. Because even if everyone's going to jump all over you and call you a crazy person, you know, I mean, they said Galileo was crazy. I mean, Galileo was right.
We wouldn't be where we are today without people like that.
The world would still be flat.
Exactly. You know? So it definitely gives hope to the children and to everything. So I'm excited. Thanks again, guys, for coming and doing this. And these are the conversations that matter.